Nathan Carter had everything: wealth, power, and a beautiful bride standing beside him. But in the midst of the grand wedding celebration, with champagne glasses clinking and laughter echoing through the air, his world came to a screeching halt with 6 simple words. "Hey, sir, you look like me." The voice was small, innocent, but it cut through the laughter and music like a dagger. Nathan turned slowly, his eyes locking onto a little boy standing just a few feet away. The child, no older than 6, grinned up at him with wide, expectant eyes. Nathan's breath caught in his throat. The resemblance was uncanny. Those familiar, deep-set hazel eyes, the same sharp jawline, even the nervous habit of fidgeting with his fingers. For a man who thrived on control, the feeling that swelled in his chest at that moment was completely foreign. The crowd chuckled, some guests offering playful comments as they turned their attention back to the celebration, but Nathan stood frozen. His mind raced, grasping for logic, for an explanation that made sense. He glanced at Emma, his beautiful bride, who had stiffened for the briefest second before forcing a light-hearted smile. "Oh, Charlie," she laughed, brushing a hand through the boy's tousled hair. "You always say the funniest things." Nathan forced himself to chuckle, nodding in agreement, but the seed of doubt had already taken root. He studied the boy carefully. Who was he? Why did he look so much like him? A quiet unease settled deep in his chest, one that refused to be brushed away with laughter or champagne. As the evening stretched on, Nathan found himself stealing glances at Charlie, unable to shake the sense of familiarity. The boy was everywhere, laughing with Emma's brother Lucas, running through the crowd, his tiny frame darting between guests with boundless energy. Each time Nathan saw him, it was like looking into a mirror of his own childhood. He tried to focus on the festivities, the toasts, and the well-wishes from family and friends, but his mind remained preoccupied. He recalled how Emma had always been private about her past, avoiding deep conversations about her life before they met. He never pushed. He respected her need for space. But now, staring at the little boy who bore his face, he wondered what else she had kept hidden. The thought gnawed at him like an itch he couldn't scratch. Later that evening, while Emma danced under the twinkling lights, Nathan wandered to the edge of the crowd, seeking a moment of solitude. His thoughts swirled like a storm inside him. Could it be possible? Was Charlie his son? Had Emma kept this from him? He dismissed the idea as ridiculous. Emma wasn't the type to lie. Was she? Just as he convinced himself to let it go, a hushed conversation caught his attention. 2 guests stood nearby, their voices low but audible. "I still can't believe Emma came back," one of them murmured. "After everything that happened with Oliver, I thought she'd stay far away from all this." Nathan's pulse quickened. Oliver? Who the hell was Oliver? The name echoed in his mind like a warning bell, and a new wave of suspicion crashed over him. He turned back toward the dance floor, watching Emma with renewed scrutiny. Her laughter rang out, effortless and free, but Nathan now saw it through a different lens. Was it genuine, or was she hiding something? He needed answers, but tonight wasn't the time. For now, he played his part, the devoted groom, the gracious host. But beneath the surface, doubt had taken root, and Nathan knew himself well enough to understand one thing. Once he got a taste of uncertainty, he wouldn't stop until he unraveled every piece of the puzzle. Long after the last guests had left and Emma lay peacefully asleep beside him, Nathan sat alone in the dimly lit study, his fingers tapping against the glass of whiskey in his hand. His reflection stared back at him from the window, but all he could see was Charlie's face. Picking up his phone, he scrolled through his contacts until he found the number he rarely used: his private investigator. His thumb hovered over the call button, hesitation creeping in. Was he really doing this? Did he want to know the truth? With a deep breath, he pressed the button. "I need you to look into someone," he said, his voice low and steady. "Emma Carter and a boy named Charlie." As he ended the call, Nathan leaned back, staring at the ceiling. The celebration was over, but something told him his real journey had only just begun. The next morning, Nathan woke early, his mind still clouded by the events of the previous night. The room was filled with the soft, golden glow of dawn filtering through the curtains, but there was no warmth in it for him. Emma lay beside him, her breathing steady, her face peaceful. She looked so serene, so trusting, yet Nathan couldn't shake the feeling that there was something she wasn't telling him. He quietly slipped out of bed, careful not to wake her, and walked over to the window, staring out at the rolling hills surrounding the estate. His life was perfect on the surface. But now, doubt gnawed at the edges, whispering that maybe everything wasn't as it seemed. He replayed Charlie's words in his mind. "Hey, sir, you look like me." The boy's face, so eerily similar to his own, haunted him. Nathan had always been meticulous, always in control, and the thought of something, or someone, slipping through the cracks terrified him. He couldn't let it go. He wouldn't. A soft knock on the door pulled him from his thoughts. Emma stood in the doorway, her hair falling in loose waves, wrapped in a silk robe. "You're up early," she said with a sleepy smile. Nathan forced a chuckle. Old habits die hard. She walked over and slid her arms around his waist, resting her head against his chest. "Relax," she whispered. "Yesterday was perfect, and we have the rest of our lives to enjoy it." Nathan swallowed the lump in his throat and kissed the top of her head, murmuring, "Yeah, the rest of our lives." But his mind was already racing ahead, plotting his next move. Later that morning, guests gathered for a farewell brunch on the estate's terrace. The atmosphere was light-hearted, filled with laughter and lingering conversations from the previous night. Nathan sat beside Emma, but his attention was elsewhere. His eyes kept drifting to Charlie, who was busy drawing on a napkin at the kids' table. Nathan watched him closely, the way he furrowed his brow when concentrating, the way he bit his lip, a habit Nathan himself had since childhood. He leaned closer to Emma. "So, Charlie, remind me again, how's he related to Lucas?" His tone was casual, but his gaze was sharp. Emma didn't flinch. "He's Lucas's nephew, remember? His sister's kid." Nathan nodded slowly, but a nagging voice in the back of his mind whispered that something didn't add up. "And his father?" he pressed. Emma's smile faltered for the briefest second before she regained her composure. "Oh, he's not really in the picture," she said lightly. "Complicated situation." Nathan studied her carefully. She was good at hiding things. Too good. As the brunch continued, Nathan found himself wandering away from the crowd. He needed fresh air, space to think. Strolling through the garden, he pulled out his phone and checked for updates. His investigator had already replied to his late-night request. "Got some preliminary info. Emma spent a lot of time in Brookhaven about 6 years ago. We'll send more soon." Brookhaven. Nathan had never heard Emma mention that town before. His grip on the phone tightened. What had she been doing there? And more importantly, why hadn't she ever told him? "Nathan!" A voice behind him made him turn sharply. It was Lucas holding a coffee cup, his expression unreadable. "You okay?" Nathan forced a smile. "Yeah, just needed some air." Lucas studied him for a moment before speaking again, his tone casual but laced with something deeper. "You've been watching Charlie a lot." Nathan stiffened but kept his cool. "He's a great kid." Lucas nodded slowly, taking a sip of his coffee. "He is? Emma loves him, you know. She's always been protective of him." Nathan narrowed his eyes. "Protective? Why would she need to be protective?" Lucas's jaw tightened slightly. "Look, I don't know what's on your mind, but Emma's passed. It's her business, all right? Some things are better left alone. Nathan felt his pulse quicken. What things, Lucas? Lucas sighed, his grip tightening around the cup. Let it go, Nathan. Enjoy your honeymoon. Don't start looking for problems where there aren't any. Nathan watched as Lucas walked away, leaving him standing there with more questions than answers. He couldn't let it go. Not now. Later that evening, after the guests had left and the estate grew quieter, Nathan sat in his study, staring at the information his investigator had sent. He scrolled through old photos of Emma, some of them taken in Brookhaven. In one of them, she was standing outside a small bookstore, her hand resting protectively on a stroller. Nathan's stomach twisted. A new message popped up on his screen. Oliver Lane. He was with Emma during her time in Brookhaven. Died 6 years ago under questionable circumstances. No father listed on Charlie's birth certificate. Nathan's fingers hovered over the keyboard, his mind racing. Oliver Lane, a name he had never heard Emma mention before. His heart pounded as realization dawned. Emma had a whole life before him, one that she had carefully kept in the dark. And now it was creeping back, threatening to unravel everything they had built together. Just as he was about to close his laptop, his phone buzzed with a new message, this time from an unknown number. Stop digging, Carter. Some things should stay buried. Nathan stared at the screen, a chill running down his spine. Someone was watching him. Someone knew what he was doing. He looked over at Emma, who was standing in the doorway, smiling at him sweetly. Coming to bed? She asked softly. Nathan forced a smile. Yeah, just finishing up. As Emma walked away, Nathan knew one thing for certain. He was far from done. He needed to know the truth, and nothing was going to stop him. The following morning, Nathan sat in the quiet of his study, staring blankly at the message from the unknown number. Stop digging, Carter. Some things should stay buried. The words lingered in his mind like an ominous shadow. He had spent years building his life around certainty, around facts and figures that never betrayed him. But this was something he couldn't control. His fingers hovered over the keyboard, hesitation gnawing at him. Was he overreacting? Was it possible he was letting paranoia get the better of him? But then his gaze fell on the photo of Emma outside the bookstore in Brookhaven, standing beside the stroller. That image had cracked something open inside him, a realization that he might not know his wife as well as he thought. He dialed his investigator, his voice low. What else do you have for me? A brief pause. Then, more than you'll like. Nathan's grip on the phone tightened. Tell me. Oliver Lane, the investigator continued. He and Emma were together for a while. Small-town guy, had a bit of a reputation. Got mixed up in some shady dealings, owed people money. He died in a car accident 6 years ago. Official cause? Brake failure. But a lot of folks in Brookhaven think it wasn't an accident. Nathan's heart pounded. And Charlie? A sigh on the other end. Charlie's birth certificate doesn't list a father, but Oliver was known to be around Emma all the time back then. Locals assumed he was the dad. Nathan swallowed hard, his mind racing. If Oliver was Charlie's father, why had Emma never told him? And if his death wasn't an accident, what exactly had Emma been running from? Just then, the study door creaked open, and Emma stepped inside. Nathan quickly closed his laptop, forcing a casual smile. Hey, he said, watching her carefully. Hey, yourself, she replied, walking over to place a cup of coffee in front of him. You've been holed up in here all morning. What's going on? Nathan hesitated, searching her face for any sign of deception. Just catching up on some work. You know me? Emma's eyes softened. I do? She reached out, running her fingers lightly over his hand. But I hope you remember that this, she gestured around the house, is our life now. Work can wait. Nathan forced a smile and nodded, but inside the questions burned brighter. Later that afternoon, unable to ignore the gnawing curiosity, Nathan made a decision. He needed to go to Brookhaven himself. He told Emma he had a last-minute business meeting in the city, but in reality, he was headed straight to the small town that held the answers he needed. Brookhaven was a quiet, sleepy town, the kind where everyone knew everyone's business. It wasn't hard to find people willing to talk, especially about Emma. At a local diner, Nathan sat at the counter and struck up a conversation with an elderly waitress named Martha. "You're Emma's husband?" she asked, wiping down the counter with a knowing smile. "She's a good girl, been through a lot." Nathan leaned forward, keeping his voice steady. "What kind of a lot?" Martha sighed, pouring him a cup of coffee. "Oliver Lane. They were close. Folks around here always said they were meant to be, but after he died, Emma packed up and left. Never came back." Nathan felt a sinking feeling in his chest. What really happened to him? The waitress lowered her voice. "Official story is his brakes failed. But Oliver, well, he owed the wrong people money. Word is, they made sure he didn't stick around to pay it back." Nathan clenched his jaw. If Emma had been involved with a man tied to dangerous people, had she left Brookhaven to protect Charlie or to protect herself? As Nathan walked out of the diner, deep in thought, he felt a presence behind him. He turned sharply, his eyes scanning the street, but he saw nothing out of the ordinary. Just a few locals going about their day. Still, the feeling of being watched gnawed at him. He drove back home in silence, his mind racing. When he arrived, Emma was waiting for him in the living room, her eyes filled with concern. "You didn't have a meeting in the city, did you?" Nathan froze, his mind scrambling for an excuse, but Emma stepped closer, her voice quiet but firm. "You went to Brookhaven." He sighed, running a hand through his hair. "Emma, I had to know. Why didn't you tell me about Oliver?" She looked down, the weight of old memories settling on her shoulders. "Because I didn't want my past to define our future," she whispered. "I didn't want to lose you." Nathan's chest tightened, but before he could respond, his phone buzzed again. Another message from the unknown number. "I warned you. Walk away." Nathan stared at the screen, the reality sinking in. This wasn't just about Emma's past anymore. Someone wanted it to stay buried. And whoever they weren't going to let him uncover the truth without a fight. Nathan's fingers tightened around his phone as he read the ominous message. The words, "I warned you. Walk away," glared back at him, sending a chill down his spine. He looked up at Emma, her eyes pleading, her hands nervously clutching the edge of the couch. He could see the fear in her gaze, the fear of losing the life they had built, the fear of the past creeping back to consume them. He took a deep breath, shoving the phone into his pocket. "Emma," he said, his voice steady but firm, "I need you to be honest with me. Who is sending these messages? What aren't you telling me?" Emma's lower lip trembled slightly as she sat down, burying her face in her hands. Silence stretched between them before she finally whispered, "I don't know who's sending them. But I have a feeling it's connected to Oliver and what happened after he died." Nathan crouched in front of her, his hands gently resting on her knees. "Tell me everything. No more secrets." Emma looked up at him, tears glistening in her eyes. "I didn't tell you about Oliver because I wanted to move on, Nathan. I wanted to leave that life behind. We were together for a while, but he had problems. He got involved with the wrong people, people who don't forgive, who don't forget." She swallowed hard, her voice shaky. "After he died, I was scared. I left Brookhaven with Charlie and started over. I didn't think they'd still be looking for me." Nathan's stomach twisted. "Who are they, Emma? Who did Oliver owe?" Emma shook her head. "I don't know all the details. He was secretive, but I know they were loan sharks, dangerous ones. He owed them a lot of money, and when he couldn't pay, He said they'd come after me if anything happened to him. Nathan exhaled slowly, piecing the puzzle together. So you ran to protect Charlie? Emma nodded, tears slipping down her cheeks. I thought if I left, if I built a new life, they'd forget about us. I never thought they'd come looking after all these years. Nathan's protective instincts kicked in, his mind racing with solutions. He couldn't let Emma and Charlie live under this looming threat. He had worked too hard to build a life of stability, and now it felt like it was slipping through his fingers. A sudden knock at the door made them both jump. Nathan stood quickly, exchanging a wary glance with Emma before walking to the door. He opened it slowly, half expecting trouble, but found Lucas standing there, his face tense and unreadable. "We need to talk," Lucas said, stepping inside without waiting for an invitation. His eyes scanned the room, landing on Emma, who quickly wiped away her tears. Nathan shut the door and crossed his arms. "What do you know, Lucas? You've been acting suspicious since yesterday." Lucas sighed, rubbing the back of his neck. "Look, I didn't want to get involved, but I see now that you're not letting this go." He glanced at Emma. "I promised her I'd keep her past buried, but it's clear that's not happening anymore." Emma shook her head. "Lucas, you should have told him." Lucas ignored her and turned to Nathan. "After Oliver died, Emma came to me scared out of her mind. She told me that Oliver had a stash, money he was hiding from those guys he owed. He never got the chance to hand it over before the accident. They think Emma knows where it is." Nathan's jaw clenched. "And does she?" Lucas shrugged. "You'd have to ask her that." Nathan turned to Emma, his voice barely above a whisper. "Emma?" She hesitated, then finally nodded. "I don't have it, Nathan, but I know where Oliver hid it. I've never gone back to get it. I thought leaving it there would keep them off my trail." Nathan paced the room, running his hand through his hair. "And now they think you have it." He exhaled sharply, looking at Lucas. "How much money are we talking?" Lucas hesitated before replying. "Enough to make dangerous people very, very angry." A heavy silence settled over the room. Nathan felt trapped between wanting to protect Emma and Charlie and the reality that their past was catching up with them fast. Finally, Nathan straightened his posture. "We can't keep running. They'll never stop if they think the money's still out there." Emma's eyes widened. "Nathan, no. You don't know what they're capable of." "I don't care," Nathan said firmly. "We can't live in fear forever." Lucas sighed. "I hate to say it, but he's right, Emma. If we don't find that money and make them believe they got what they came for, they won't stop." Emma wiped her tears away and nodded reluctantly. "Okay, I'll take you to where Oliver hid it. But once we do this, Nathan, we walk away. No more digging, no more looking back." Nathan took her hand and squeezed it tightly. "I promise." But deep down, he knew. Promises were easy to make and much harder to keep. That night, Nathan couldn't sleep. He lay beside Emma, staring at the ceiling, his mind running through scenarios of what could happen next. He checked his phone once more, half expecting another threatening message. None came, but the silence was almost more unsettling. Tomorrow they would go to Brookhaven. Tomorrow they would face the past. And Nathan had a sinking feeling that the past wasn't done with them yet. The drive to Brookhaven felt longer than Nathan expected. The road stretched endlessly ahead, winding through thick forests and desolate stretches of land that seemed forgotten by time. Emma sat in the passenger seat, staring out the window, her hands clenched in her lap. Lucas followed behind them in his truck, his eyes scanning the surroundings cautiously. The weight of what they were about to do hung heavy in the air, unspoken but understood. Nathan stole a glance at Emma. Her face was pale, her lips pressed into a thin line. He could feel the tension radiating off her, a mixture of fear and determination. "Are you sure about this?" he asked quietly. Emma exhaled slowly, her fingers gripping the edge of her seat. "No," she admitted, "but I don't have a choice anymore, do I?" Nathan reached over and squeezed her hand gently. "We'll get through this, together." She gave him a weak smile, but her eyes held a different truth. She was terrified, and so was he. Brookhaven hadn't changed much since Emma had last been there. The small town had an eerie stillness to it, as if it were trapped in time. The locals eyed them warily as they pulled into the parking lot of an old, run-down motel. Nathan watched Emma as she looked around, her shoulders tensing at the familiarity of it all. Lucas parked beside them and stepped out of his truck. "Where to?" he asked, keeping his voice low. Emma pointed toward a small abandoned building on the outskirts of town. "It's in there," she whispered. Nathan took a deep breath and nodded. "Let's get this over with." They moved quickly, keeping their heads down as they approached the building. It was an old storage facility, long forgotten and covered in layers of dust and grime. Emma led them to a rusted metal door and hesitated before pulling out a key from her coat pocket. She glanced at Nathan, her expression hesitant. "Oliver gave me this before he died," she said softly. "Told me to never come back." Nathan gave her an encouraging nod. "We're here now. Let's finish this." With a trembling hand, Emma unlocked the door, and it creaked open with an unsettling groan. The smell of dampness and decay hit them instantly, and Nathan's stomach churned. They stepped inside, flashlights cutting through the darkness. Emma led them toward the back, where a stack of old crates and dust-covered furniture sat untouched. She knelt down and pulled aside an old rug, revealing a loose floorboard beneath. With shaky hands, she pried it open, revealing a small metal box inside. Nathan reached down, his pulse racing, and lifted the box out. He placed it on the floor and slowly opened the lid. Stacks of cash, neatly bundled, filled the box. His stomach turned at the sight of it, more money than he had ever seen in one place. Lucas let out a low whistle. "That's got to be at least a few $100,000, he muttered. Emma's face was pale. It's what Oliver was hiding. This is what they were after. Nathan stood, his mind spinning. "We have what they want. Now we figure out how to get them off your back for good." Just then, a noise outside made them all freeze. Footsteps. Nathan's instincts kicked in, and he quickly closed the box, shoving it under his coat. He gestured for Emma and Lucas to stay quiet as he crept toward the door and peered outside. A black SUV idled near the edge of the lot, its headlights cutting through the fog. Nathan's heart pounded in his chest. They weren't alone. "We need to get out of here," he whispered urgently. Lucas nodded, his eyes scanning the area. "I'll pull the truck around back. Meet me there." Emma clung to Nathan's arm as they slipped through the side entrance, moving quickly but cautiously. The air felt heavy, charged with the threat of imminent danger. As they neared Lucas's truck, the SUV's engine roared to life, its tires screeching against the pavement as it moved toward them. Nathan yanked open the passenger door, pushing Emma inside just as the SUV skidded to a stop, blocking the exit. A tall man in a dark coat stepped out, his expression unreadable, but his intent crystal clear. "Going somewhere?" he called out, his voice dripping with menace. Nathan stepped in front of Emma protectively, his mind racing. "We don't want any trouble." The man chuckled, shaking his head. "Trouble found you the moment you opened that box. Hand it over, and we'll be on our way." Lucas stepped forward, trying to reason with him. "Look, we have the money. You can take it and leave them alone." The man's eyes narrowed. "It's not just about the money, pal. It's about loose ends." Nathan's jaw tightened. They weren't just here to collect. They were here to tie up loose ends, permanently. Without thinking, Nathan grabbed Emma's hand and shouted, "Get in the truck now!" Lucas hit the gas, and the truck roared to life just as the man lunged toward them. Nathan barely had time to slam the door shut before Lucas peeled out of the lot, tires screeching as they sped down the darkened road. Emma was trembling, clutching the box tightly to her chest. Nathan pulled her close, whispering, "We'll figure this out. I promise." Lucas glanced at him through the rearview mirror, his expression grim. "We can't go home, Nathan." "Not yet." Nathan nodded. "We need to disappear for a while." Emma wiped her tears and took a shaky breath. "I'm so sorry, Nathan. I should have told you everything." He cupped her face gently. "We'll get through this. Together." As they drove through the darkness, Nathan knew their lives would never be the same. They had the money, but it came with a price. And whoever those men were, they wouldn't stop until they got what they wanted. The road stretched out before them, uncertain and dangerous. But one thing was clear. Nathan wasn't just fighting for answers anymore. He was fighting for their survival. The truck sped down the darkened highway, the tension inside thick and suffocating. Nathan could hear Emma's ragged breathing beside him, her hands still clutching the metal box filled with Oliver's secret fortune. Lucas gripped the wheel tightly, his eyes darting between the road and the rearview mirror. The black SUV was no longer in sight, but the fear lingered. Nathan's mind raced. Running wasn't an option anymore. They needed a plan. "We can't keep driving forever," he said, his voice low but firm. "We need somewhere safe to lay low and figure out our next move." Lucas nodded, his jaw clenched. "I know a place, an old cabin my buddy owns, off the grid. No cell service, no cameras. It's about an hour out." Emma finally spoke, her voice trembling but determined. "We shouldn't have come back here. I thought I buried all of this. I thought we were safe." Nathan reached over, squeezing her hand reassuringly. "We will be safe, but we need to end this." He looked at the box resting on her lap. "That money is the only leverage we have." Emma nodded reluctantly, but her eyes were filled with worry. "They won't stop, Nathan. You heard him. It's not just about the money anymore." The truck turned onto a dirt road, kicking up dust as they drove deeper into the woods. After what felt like an eternity, Lucas pulled up to a small, run-down cabin hidden among the trees. The place was eerily quiet, the chirping of crickets the only sound breaking the silence. Lucas killed the engine and turned to them. "We'll be safe here for now. We need to think this through before making any moves." Inside, the cabin smelled of damp wood and dust, but it offered shelter and, for the moment, safety. Nathan paced the room, his thoughts churning. "We need to find out who's behind this. Who's still after Emma after all these years?" Lucas sat down on an old couch, rubbing his temples. "I have a contact back in Brookhaven, a guy who used to work with Oliver. If anyone knows what's really going on, it's him." Nathan glanced at Emma, who sat silently by the window, staring out into the darkness. He could see the exhaustion in her eyes, but also the weight of guilt. "I'll go," Nathan said finally. "I need to know what we're up against." Emma turned to him, alarmed. "Nathan, it's too dangerous." He crouched in front of her, his hands on her knees. "I won't let them hurt you or Charlie, Emma. I need to do this." After a moment, she nodded, and he pressed a soft kiss to her forehead. "Stay here. Keep the doors locked." Lucas stood. "I'm coming with you. We'll be in and out before anyone notices." Nathan agreed, and after ensuring Emma was secure inside the cabin, the two men drove back toward Brookhaven under the cover of darkness. Nathan's grip on the steering wheel was tight, his mind replaying every conversation, every clue. Oliver's secrets were bigger than he had anticipated, and now they were caught in the middle of something dangerous. They met Lucas's contact at a deserted gas station on the edge of town. The man, a wiry figure with deep-set eyes and a nervous twitch, leaned against an old pickup truck, lighting a cigarette with shaky hands. "You Carter?" he asked, eyeing Nathan carefully. Nathan nodded. "What do you know about Oliver Lane and the money?" The man exhaled slowly, glancing around as if expecting someone to be watching. Oliver wasn't just in debt, he was in deep with some real dangerous people, and when he died, they didn't just lose money, they lost trust. He flicked the cigarette away. They think Emma knows more than she's letting on. Nathan's stomach churned. Why now? Why come after her after all these years? The man shrugged. Loose ends. You dig too deep, you wake up things that should have stayed buried. Nathan's jaw clenched. Who are they? The man hesitated, then muttered, "A man named Donovan Steele. Runs things from the shadows. If he knows you're involved, you better believe he won't stop until he gets what he wants." Lucas swore under his breath. "We need to get out of here." Nathan nodded and turned to leave, but the man grabbed his arm. "If you've got the money, you've got one shot to make this right. Steele doesn't take no for an answer." Nathan pulled away and returned to the truck, his heart hammering in his chest. Steele? The name alone sent a ripple of unease through him. When they returned to the cabin, Emma met them at the door, her face pale with worry. "What did you find out?" Nathan took a deep breath. "It's worse than we thought. Oliver was tangled up with a guy named Donovan Steele. He's the one behind all this." Emma's face drained of color. "I remember Oliver mentioning him. He said if Steele ever came looking, we had to disappear." Nathan pulled her into his arms. "We're not running anymore. We have the money. We can use it to make a deal." Lucas frowned. "Or it could make things worse." Nathan didn't answer. Deep down, he knew Lucas was right. This wasn't just about money anymore. This was about survival. As they sat around the table planning their next move, Nathan's phone buzzed again. Another message. "Last chance, Carter. Hand it over or you'll regret it." Nathan stared at the message, then at Emma and Lucas. He made a decision. "We're going to end this. Tomorrow I'm going to meet Steele." Emma gasped. "Nathan, no, it's too dangerous." He cupped her face gently. "It's the only way, Emma. We can't live like this. I won't let them control our lives." Lucas nodded grimly. "If we do this, we need a plan." Nathan looked at the box of money, then back at his wife. "We have leverage, and I'm going to make sure we walk away from this for good." The cabin grew silent, the weight of the decision settling over them. Nathan knew that tomorrow could change everything. It was their only shot at reclaiming their lives, and he wasn't going to let anything stand in his way. The next morning, Nathan stood in front of the cabin, staring out at the mist rolling through the trees. His hands were clenched into fists, his jaw tight with determination. Today was the day it would all end, one way or another. He could hear Emma moving inside, the soft rustling of papers, the nervous pacing of feet. Lucas sat at the kitchen table, loading his gun, his expression grim. Emma walked up behind Nathan, wrapping her arms around his waist. "Please don't do this," she whispered. Her voice trembled with fear. "We can run. We can disappear again." Nathan turned, cupping her face in his hands. "No, Emma. I won't live in fear. I won't let Charlie grow up always looking over his shoulder." His eyes softened, and he kissed her forehead. "Trust me, I'll fix this." Emma's tears slipped down her cheeks, but she nodded. "Just come back to us." Nathan hugged her tightly, then stepped back, taking the box of money from the table. "Let's go," he said to Lucas, his voice resolute. The drive to the abandoned warehouse where the meeting was set felt like a countdown to something inevitable. Nathan's heart pounded in his chest, but his mind remained sharp. Steele was a man known for his ruthlessness, and Nathan knew that money alone wouldn't be enough to satisfy him. He needed to play this carefully. Lucas parked the truck a few blocks away, scanning the surroundings carefully. "You sure about this?" he asked, his fingers twitching near his holster. Nathan nodded, exhaling deeply. "Yeah, no more running." As they stepped inside the dimly lit warehouse, the echo of their footsteps bounced off the metal walls. A group of men stood in the center, their faces shadowed, their postures threatening. And there he was, Donovan Steele. Tall, imposing, dressed in an expensive black suit, Steele exuded power. His cold, calculating eyes locked onto Nathan with an unsettling grin. "Mr. Carter," he drawled, his voice as smooth as silk but laced with danger. "I was beginning to think you'd run like your wife." Nathan swallowed his anger and kept his composure. "I have what you want." He set the metal box down, flipping it open to reveal the stacks of cash. "This ends today." Steele eyed the money, but his smirk never wavered. "You think this is just about money?" he asked, stepping closer, his voice low and menacing. "Oliver Lane didn't just owe me cash, Carter. He owed me loyalty. And when he failed to deliver, your dear wife ran off with the only thing I wanted more than this money." Nathan's brows furrowed. "What are you talking about?" Steele's grin widened. "Information, Carter. Oliver had something of mine, something your lovely wife might still have tucked away. A little black book full of names and secrets." Nathan felt his stomach drop. He turned to Lucas, who looked equally stunned. Emma had never mentioned anything about a book. Steele stepped even closer, his voice a deadly whisper. "If I don't get it, the money won't mean a damn thing." Nathan straightened, his mind racing. He had to think fast. "I don't have it," he said, meeting Steele's gaze without flinching. "But I can get it." Steele studied him for a long moment before nodding slowly. "You have 24 hours, Carter. If you don't bring me what I want, I'll take something from you that you can't replace." Nathan's blood ran cold, but he kept his face unreadable. Without another word, he grabbed the box, turned on his heel, and walked out of the warehouse with Lucas right behind him. Back at the cabin, Emma's face drained of color when Nathan told her what Steele wanted. "I don't have the book," she whispered. "I never saw it." Nathan sighed, rubbing his face. "We need to think, Emma. Where would Oliver have hidden something like that?" Emma's eyes suddenly widened. "The bookstore." Nathan's brow furrowed. "The one in Brookhaven?" Emma nodded, pacing anxiously. "He always spent time there. He said it was the safest place in town because no one ever went into that dusty old place." Lucas stood. "Then that's where we start." That night, under the cover of darkness, they returned to Brookhaven. Emma led them to the old bookstore, its wooden sign hanging crookedly above the entrance. The place smelled of old paper and dust, the shelves towering with forgotten books. Emma moved with purpose, leading them to the back where an old desk sat covered in cobwebs. She pulled out the bottom drawer and felt around, her fingers trembling. Then she gasped. "It's here!" Nathan's heart pounded as she pulled out a small black leather book. He flipped it open and skimmed the pages. Names, numbers, transactions. Enough to put Donovan Steele behind bars for a lifetime. A sharp noise outside made them all freeze. Footsteps. Nathan closed the book and shoved it into his jacket. "We need to go. Now." As they rushed back to the truck, shadows moved behind them. Suddenly, a voice cut through the night. "Going somewhere?" Steele's men surrounded them, their eyes cold and unrelenting. Nathan tightened his grip on the book. "You don't want to do this," he said, his voice calm but deadly. The leader sneered. "Hand it over, and maybe we'll let you walk away." Nathan exchanged a glance with Lucas, then made a split-second decision. He threw the book into the truck and shouted, "Drive!" Lucas gunned the engine as Nathan grabbed Emma and dived into the back seat. The tires screeched, and the truck sped away as gunshots rang out behind them. They drove through the night, Emma sobbing quietly in Nathan's arms while Lucas navigated the winding roads. Eventually, they reached the city, far from Steele's reach. The next morning, Nathan handed the Black Book over to the authorities, ensuring Steele's reign of terror would end. He watched as officers flipped through the pages, nodding grimly at the names inside. "You did the right thing," one of them said. Nathan nodded, but his mind was elsewhere. He was thinking about Emma and Charlie, about the life they could finally have without the shadows of the past looming over them. Back at the cabin, Emma sat on the porch, staring out into the forest. Nathan joined her, taking her hand in his. "It's over," he whispered. "We're free." Emma leaned into him, relief washing over her. "I'm so sorry, Nathan, for everything." He kissed her forehead. "We start fresh. No more secrets." Lucas emerged from inside, grinning. "I think it's time for a long vacation." Nathan smiled for the first time in days. "Yeah, somewhere with no surprises." Emma laughed softly, and for the first time in a long time, Nathan felt at peace. The road ahead was uncertain, but together they were ready to face it. The past was finally behind them. And this time, it would stay there.